And we are live, I think. Yes, we're
Yes.
live. Okay. I don't know what's happened. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Y'all already know who I am, but I'm here with my friends, Pete and Linnell, and we are bringing back Bashment Book Club. Okay,
Let's
after a little
go.
bit of hiatus. And we're coming back to you with our discussion for Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. Does anybody have a copy? Oh yeah, you have the US copy. Oh, love that cover. This book
It
has
is so
two
pretty.
really good covers.
Which
Like,
is rare. It's
yeah,
rare.
usually one is like I can't pick which one I want. Like I'm deciding which one to get. It's so
Fair.
good. So Black Cake is a novel that is set in an unnamed Caribbean island that is basically Jamaica. And it is about essentially, well, it's set between Jamaica, the UK, and the US, mostly in the US, really. And it centers around these two siblings whose mother, who's from Jamaica, leaves them I was going to say voice note. It's not a voice note. She leaves them a tape recording of um, basically all of the family secrets that she never told them while she was alive. So after her death, she's basically making them listen to a bunch of traumatic family history, and the book kind of centers around all of the juicy details of everybody's past. So obviously, if you're here, hopefully you've read the book. If not, we're gonna be discussing spoilers. So, and there's a lot of things to spoil with this novel.
It's true.
So I
So
wanted
many
to
twists.
start off with my colleagues introducing themselves and just giving me a general idea or thoughts on the book, your star rating, you liked it, didn't like it, middle of the road.
I love that you're calling us colleagues one. Giving us a very
So
professional edge over here.
I'm corrupted by academia. I'm sorry, okay?
That's
I was
so
gonna
funny.
say
Hi.
besties, but I was like, that's too Twitter.
Listen, besties. Also, that I call everyone besties now. Hi everyone, I'm Paige. From formerly Minimal Bookie. Now Paige Alicia is my channel name. I just finished this half an hour ago. I was just saying that I've been listening to it all day on audio while also physically reading the book, and I don't know if that impacted my experience. I'm not used to reading like a lot of literary fiction anymore. I'm very much into romance. I would say this is like a solid 4 for me. It wasn't like super enjoyable, but I could tell how well written it was, in my opinion, that I was like willing to give it a higher rating for like just acknowledging the craft that went into it and how well it was tied together.
Linnell? I think Linnell's stuck.
Mm.
Oh, am I?
Okay,
You're
no,
good now. You're good now.
Okay. To, uh, but I hope I don't get stuck.
It was a little choppy, but
it was a little choppy, but
Well, come back to me. Come back to me. Come back to me, then. Let me see if I can fix it.
okay, it's actually really good now. Like I'm hearing you good now.
Oh.
It's as soon as we
And
say
now
that.
it's okay, well, I'll just give you my thoughts. Overall, I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was fun. I think I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, but that's like, when you just finish a book and you're still like,
yeah.
and then you give it 5 stars, and you go back and you're like, so for me, it's somewhere between 4 and 5 stars. Overall, I thought it was a fantastic story. It's definitely one where I found like I had to kind of suspend my disbelief a little bit because there was so much like going on, and like a lot of like the things individually I could see them happening to people, but all in one life, like it was a lot. But yeah, overall I thought it was really great. I enjoyed it. I thought the audiobook was fun to listen to. So yeah, I would give it like 4.5, 4 stars maybe.
Yeah, I think it was like it was the train moment when they were going to Edinburgh that was like the suspend my disbelief moment for me, where I was like, okay, I just have to accept that this also happened to the same person.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole book was like, okay, I have to accept that this happened to her, and this, and this,
and this,
and this,
yeah.
And this. So, Linnell, are you back with us?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. I'm a weekly reader on all social platforms, and I mostly also read romance. And I took a long time to come to this book. I think it wasn't until maybe part 2, more part where started to like merge, and I think it's partly because of all of the point of views that were integral to the story, make it make sense. And I think I messaged you guys. This reminds me of in all of these pieces converging just to tell so and so this, like was all to get to this one point that this life was hard. And so I think around is good. I think it was more like a 3.5 for me.
Okay.
Yes, we got about 50% of everything.
Oh,
Jesus. Okay, I'm gonna go and come back.
Video. It might work if you're like off video for the audio.
Okay.
Maybe that could help.
Yeah.
Oh, so ghetto.
Okay, but now we can hear you perfectly. Yeah. So
it's probably the video.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with like the point that it sort of feels like you're being told a story. I feel like that's the point of like the way that the author decided to like frame the novel. I thought it was really interesting, especially because I was listening to it as well, that there were sections that were just from the mom's video that they were watching, and like that's like the storytelling element of like she's like, let me tell you about my life, and that's how you're getting. And I thought it was interesting that it led into the third person where we were actually seeing what she was telling versus just relying on that like voice, like the video element of it with the children's chapters.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that if it was just her recording, it would have been too difficult for us to believe that like this one woman could just tell a story like in prose, if that makes sense. Like you know, I like that it was it realistically kind of shifted. And then also too, I think that made room for her, like certain details not being mentioned to them, but we get it in the so that was interesting. A question that I have for both of y'all that I'm curious about is, at what point did you figure out who Coventina was? Or did you think from the beginning, like, who did you think Coventina was initially, and were you correct when it was revealed?
I think I just immediately thought it was the mom, but that's also because, like I said, I was listening to it on audio while I was reading as well, and I just was like, they're going to only introduce us to this person's story if it's relevant, and that must mean it's like the mother's story that we're being told. It also took me a minute to realize that her name was different from like her, like the name that we were given in the beginning was different from the person. I just assumed it was the mom, and then I realized there was the different identity situation happening, and I was like, oh, that was something I missed in my reading experience. And it was the same with, I feel like Mabel / Marble / I can't remember what her original name was, the adopted Matilda, the adopted daughter. Mm-hmm. I also knew who that was immediately, but that's just because I was following the story, and I always assumed that the author was just introducing us to the person that we hadn't met yet, but that we knew was coming into the story itself.
This book is very much like one of those, like, you know how Caribbean people always have like 10 different names? You know, so like it was like, so I think like if you're not from the Caribbean, you might read this and be like, oh, it's so ridiculous for somebody to have so much different names: Etta, Pringle, Bunny, Benedict. No, ma'am, it's actually quite realistic.
Yeah, the one that did surprise me was Bunny and Etta. I think that one I was like, oh, that was the surprise at the end for me.
Now?
Yeah, I definitely think it added to like the storytelling, because to this day I don't know some family members' actual names, which seems odd, but it was so true in terms of like, well, who is this person that we're talking about? And I think it was important to use their nickname in order to tell the story, because it was a part of their identity. And I different areas of the world.
You're cutting out again, BB.
Yeah, you want to take off the video and it's like,
can you hear me now?
Human and robot.
It truly, yeah. It's like going in between because of the video, I think.
Yeah. Hmm.
LOL.
I love how it's always one of us.
It always is. Yeah.
It always it's almost never you. It's either
It's-
me or
And
Linnell.
it's always for this. It's always for this show. None of my other shows ever have this problem. It truly is racism
Oh my
against the
God.
Caribbean. I'm convinced.
Exactly. That's what it is. I realized it was Linnell.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So when did you realize that Coventina and Eleanor were the same person?
Not until the train wreck. Not so it took a minute for me to
Wow.
guess.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was still like Matilda, like the mother telling the story
Mm.
through what her imagination of her kids' lives would be. And I was like, that doesn't make sense until she was in the hospital. I was like, I get it now.
Right.
So
That makes sense. I I think to me it happened a little bit before she revealed to the children in the tape, as you can probably decipher by now. Because it's like, yeah, I deciphered by then. But I didn't know from the beginning. So when it started, I thought that Coventina was the sister because she started
Mm.
off the book saying that, you all have a sister. That you don't.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So I thought Coventina was the sister. I knew there was a name change. I figured that Matilda was probably Eleanor, and then Eleanor moved to England, abandoned her daughter in Jamaica, and
Mm.
changed her name to Eleanor or whatever. But then I paid closer attention to the timeline, and I was like, no, Eleanor is a lot younger than this Matilda woman. And so then it
Mhm.
crossed my mind that she might have been Covey, but I think I just didn't make the connection because Covey seemed so different from like young adult Covey is like a vastly different person personality wise from
Mm-hmm.
adult Eleanor. She's like this free young liberal soul, and Eleanor is like this proper old lady or whatever.
Mhm.
So it just didn't seem
Mm-hmm.
cohesive to me, and I guess the author did it purposefully to try to throw us off. Uh, but yeah, so I didn't realize until later on. I was like, okay, and I could see how all of the trauma and all of the things that happened to her led her to becoming the person that she would eventually uh, become. But yeah,
That's what I was partly saying, that you get like this sanitized version, right? When you try to assimilate to a different country. So you're never the person that you knew growing up, right? Because you want to make it in America, you want to make it to the UK. So you have to kind of divorce yourself from these identities that you had before. And that was part of the survival, right? Her and Gibbs needed to assume new identities, and they had to let go, of their past selves. And the same thing with Bunny, right? She was a lot of respectability politics because her success was contingent on not bringing shame to the island, right? Because she was always different in her abilities to swim. And so it's always like this push and pull. I'm not that person anymore. I'm not this young kid that was being exploited or taken advantage of or left behind. I am now this successful person. So I'm embodying this new uh, it's still the same person, but I have to embody this kind of confidence and this kind of um, aspirational story now.
yeah, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of respectability, and it's interesting because it's like when you meet these older people, you think that okay, this is how they were raised, this is how they always were.
Mhm.
But it's like no, they were also young and free and wild too. But then something forced them to confront that okay, you need to be a certain way in order to be respected in the society, especially when you leave your island country and you move to the white people
Mm-hmm.
country, right? And you have to assimilate and be respected. So yeah, I it was really interesting to just sort of see the difference between Covey and Eleanor and how they were basically two different people in their own right. Um, Another question I wanted to ask y'all is what do y'all think like the symbolic purpose of black cake, the dessert
Mm.
itself, was in this novel, right? Because I mean, why not any other? cake, or I mean, there's so many different recipes from the region, right? Like, so what do y'all think is special about black cake that the author decided to center that the novel around that sort of dessert as a symbol?
Yeah,
Well,
that was
first,
really. No, go ahead, Leno.
could we just say I want to be transparent here? I do not like black cakes. I was like,
I don't know.
where?
I grew into it as an adult. Like now that I drink alcohol, I like black
I've
cake
never
more.
really had black cake.
Yeah, so to me, it had like this symbolism where it's like you, in order for a black cake to be good, you have to keep, like, you have to prepare it over time, right? It's never that first fermented fruit that's good. Like, it's the year before, right? And so I think it was like the stories keep building, and every year the black cake added like an additional piece of their family story. So I was like, oh, that makes sense. But the way it was described in the book as a recipe, I was like, I have never heard it prepared this way.
Yeah, I feel like the fermentation element of it for sure is something to do with it, because like Linnell said, it's something that it takes years. Sometimes some people like ferment their fruit for years before they even touch it for specific like cakes. I was very like interested in the whole, it was like made for like weddings and stuff and special occasions, because I feel like where like in Barbados, like we don't really like, we eat at Christmas time. I feel like that's the time that we pull it out, and not really at weddings and stuff. We have like the more traditional again. And then the idea of tradition, like the black cake was a traditional, and now like with the exports coming from like the West, the traditional cakes are different now. So like that idea of like tradition changing, and the food that we think is traditional isn't really, because we wouldn't have access to these things organically without like the slave trade and everything that happened. I really liked the idea of diasporan food and how what we think is traditional is actually impacted by the history without us even realizing. So I think that was like really the core. It's like we don't realize how much of our history really impacts what we consider our traditions now.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like what, because for me, I had a couple ideas. Like the first thing that, first of all, I have no experience with black cake. I recall having a piece of black cake once, but I think it was like a halal version without the alcohol, which I don't know how that would work, because it seems like that the alcohol is an important part. So I don't really know too much about black cake, but like from reading it in the book and seeing that, okay, it's something that lasts very long. So people apparently put it in the freezer or whatnot, and it could last for years. I was like, maybe this was the only thing that was consistent in Covey's life, because I think Covey / Eleanor / Ellie / Douglas / Bennett / Coventina / all her names, right? Like her whole story. I mean, this is ultimately, I think, a story about abandonment, loss, and separation, right? She had to abandon people. She was abandoned. She was lost. She was separated. She had to change her identity at least twice, right? And so I think black cake became the only thing in her life that was consistent, if that makes sense. It was the only thing that stuck with her and stuck by her in a way. So for me, that's the impression that I got. But it wasn't until we got to Marble that I realized too that it's also kind of like what you were talking about with history, but also an overall analogy for people itself, like the food like being analogous for us Caribbean people, because we're not most of us are not indigenous to the region, right? We have heritage from different places, and even Covey herself, her father was an immigrant from China, so she's mixed. She has that kind of mixed heritage. We're not just, it's kind of like the impurity and the mixing of traditions, the mixing of cultures, the mixing of races, that kind of creates us as Caribbean people. And so I think that's what black cake is supposed to be, because the whole thing was like, oh, black cake is really an English tradition, but it came to the region, it was Caribbeanified, and it became its own thing. So just like our ancestors, just like us, so that's also like the kind of impression that I got, because all of the characters in this book have mixed heritage.
Right? Yeah, which I thought was really interesting, because I feel like we hardly get that sometimes in like these, especially the more literary fiction books. I feel like it's more monolithic.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's so true to the Caribbean experience. So Kiki says fruitcake is still the traditional wedding cake in Jamaica. Some will have two now, and the fruitcake is what they cut up and send with the guests home.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Especially because like that is the kind of cake that keeps, so you're like sending home a bit of like the festivities with the person. I think that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's just amazing, like how much food is such a huge part of like, you know, how we like. It's also like a indicate like food in a way is like a historical document in its own right. And so I think that's kind of what Black Cake was doing in the story. And food could also be a weapon, as we saw with the murder of what's his name, Little Henry.
Little Man, but his name was like something
Right,
Henry.
Little Man. Okay, yeah.
Little
Sorry,
Man.
bad at names. So that's another thing that I was curious about with y'all. Did you know? First of all, when Pearl was doing the cake, I don't know if I just misinterpreted it. I thought she poisoned him with the cake. I didn't realize.
Did she not?
No, she didn't. She didn't. She was going to, but then she didn't, and then somehow
it was the champagne.
It was the champagne that was ended up being poisoned, so nobody knew. So like the whole mystery, Pearl was like, I decided not to go through with it, but somehow somebody did, and the whole mystery was whether Covey did it or not. So did y'all realize? And obviously, it was revealed closer to the end that it was actually Bunny who did it. So did y'all realize that it was Bunny or Covey?
I did not at all. I didn't think it was Covey. Like I did not think like that she would do it. Like she felt pretty resigned to the fate at that time. But yeah, I did not realize it was Bunny until the end when it was all revealed.
I was actually hoping it was Lynn, the father, so he could be redeemed. Right?
That man was not getting redeemed. That was something I noticed was like a lot of the male characters in this like weren't, I feel like, as fleshed out in a way as like the female characters in terms of their complexity. Like even the son as well. That was something. So I knew Lynn was not gonna come back in any shape or form to do something like that.
This was really a book about the woman, I think.
It was very much so. Which was like interesting to me, especially because like the son got his own perspective in chapters as well. But I felt like he was the least interesting person of everyone that we met. He was like a non-issue to me.
Yeah. How did y'all feel about it?
Just about the son, I do think he was framed as the prodigal son. Like he did everything right. He was supposed to be this pillar of a role model, but he was still dealing with anger. He was still being pulled over by the police. He didn't get happy. I mean, he kind of started it towards the end, but he had to like let go of some of the things that he thought he deserved because he did everything right. So I was like, oh, okay. That was the only thing that I feel like his takeaway was, but most of the other men, not so much.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of like made sense because I mean like how the men in the book sort of were made sense, but also it was just like, can we just get like cool men in a Caribbean novel for once?
And like imagine if it was the guy that had been interested in baking with his mom. Like that, just that little twist, like something that would have like added. But then I guess like the whole like I don't know, like the realism of it, because I feel like the men when I was growing up in the Caribbean were always like, women get in the kitchen, like why aren't you learning to cook from your mom? So it was realistic that that was the way she connected with her mom too.
But you don't feel like Gibbs was a good, like he was gentle, he was patient, he was steadfast. So I think we gotta, I mean,
Gibbs was the one, he was.
Gibbs was great. It's just that he was also not really fleshed out. Like he just kind of was. Yeah, even the good men in the book were two-dimensional. You know what I mean? Like they wouldn't. This book really felt like I felt like Marble was honestly more complex.
I'm so sad.
Than Byron was, and like Marble, we didn't even get to meet her, and like honestly,
until part 4.
To like the last quarter of the book, and she's like a key element of the story, right? So it was interesting to me that I walked away more with Marble than Byron. But yeah, I found I feel like the book kind of wanted us to be annoyed with Benny for like her decision, but I was just there like, yes, Gil. Yes, girl. Like
Yeah.
I personally didn't think that the decision to like leave her parents was a good idea because obviously
Mhm.
they died. She didn't really get closure that she needed from them. But I also felt like her parents kind of deserved it, in
Mm.
a way, because it's like if you can't accept your child, you know, what are you doing? Like, why are you bringing
Yeah.
children into the world? You know, and I feel like I understand her decision, even though it might not have been the best decision. Like, I emotionally, like, I get why she did it. It's
Mhm.
satisfying to be able to like punish your family members by not talking to them, even though it's not a healthy thing. So I don't know. What did y'all think of Benny and her relationship with the family?
I mean, I completely understood it. Also, I feel like there's been a lot of media recently that has been exploring like the trauma of being in part of the diaspora and having your parents not accept you, especially for like queer identities. Like I'm thinking of Everything Everywhere All at Once specifically that I watched recently that also explored like how the trauma of not feeling accepted by your parents who are supposed to love you unconditionally and how that can affect you and make you a better person. So I would understand wanting to step away from that situation and to protect yourself. So I never thought that like I understood like the trauma of it, so I was never thinking she was being super, super selfish, even though she was theoretically for her parents being selfish. I understood why she would want to not show up in these situations.
So I think for me, Benny felt like she was supposed to be flighty, right?
Hmm.
But part of that was that she was holding in really traumatic stuff that happened to her. And so she was suffering in silence. And I think the way in which we got to see that, and it didn't even happen, it just happened subtly that where we were getting bits and pieces because I think we thought that it was only about her identity, but I think it was
Hmm.
about her identity and not having support from people who she knew, like friends, right, that were supposed to protect her. They also hurt her. So it was like this compounded experience of everyone that she thought that would protect her did in some way. And that's why she was non-committal. And so I think for me, it was like really interesting to see how sometimes silence is used as a way to cope, but also protect yourself because you have learned that not everyone who's supposed to care about you actually does. And can we just say, I wanted someone to run over Steve?
Yes.
Yes, great.
Okay. That was so left so unresolved to me. And that was one thing I was like, really, girl? But I also thought it was really interesting that her parents never apologized, which is what I think really stuck out to me. But they started showing up in a way that they thought would absolve them from not apologizing. And I think that is so symbolic of the way Caribbean parents show
Hmm.
up for their kids instead of acknowledging that you hurt your kid and saying these are the things that I'm going to do to be better or do better and to repair the relationship. Like that stuck out to me and I was like, "Oh, this is coming up in therapy." I feel it. Because yes, to yeah, you call every day or you're checking in on me or you're showing up to see that I'm doing okay, but you never acknowledge that you hurt me.
Yeah,
So
Hmm.
yes, rooting
yeah. West Indians
for
suck
Ben.
at vulnerability. Like,
Hmm.
we're really bad at it. And I think this book was like, I think you hit the nail on the head, Lena. Like, this book was like very representative of that because it's like, um, people don't know how, like, you have a fight, you fall out, you stop talking, and then you start back talking. You don't address what stopped you from talking in the first place
Hmm.
because it's easier to just go back to a person than it is to actually be vulnerable enough to discuss what happened, or even, dare I say, hold yourself accountable and apologize, or try to understand why that person felt the way that they felt. um, and I mean, it was so difficult for And maybe too because I mean Gibbs and Covey or Eleanor and Bennett, you know, their whole lives was concealing and covering things up. That perhaps Benny's openness was just so foreign to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like how could you be so open with the things that you're experiencing and going through? You know what I mean? Like when we have been, you know, even without like their situation, like you grow up in a culture where it's like conceal, don't feel like Elsa, you know. So yeah, I think that's definitely.
Yeah, and I feel like this was like an over dramatized way of like exploring how often parents in the Caribbean, like when they experience their own trauma, you never know about the trauma your parents have experienced because they never, like, I know things that my parents have, like, they theoretically gone through things, but I don't know the specifics of those situations and how that may have impacted like our relationships growing up and how they decided to raise me. So I feel like with like the whole like different identities and that element of it where there was a reason they had to keep secrets, but that's just like it tends to be part of like just growing up in the Caribbean. If your parents have experienced trauma, they generally will be like, it's something I went through in the past, like we're not going to talk about it now,
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
situation.
yeah. I have like those experiences too. Like and even my mother once said to me, like I was asking her questions about like family and stuff, and she was like, "There's so much things, and I don't like to talk about those things.
Mm-hmm.
Like leave those things in the
In the
past. You know,
past.
like we don't. They might. What some of them might do is they might bring up like gossip stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll talk other people business. They'll tell
Mm-hmm.
you
But
what
not
the
their own.
neighbors and what your family, what your other family went through, but they're not going to talk about their own trauma,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is also very interesting,
Yeah.
I think. Um, I think, I mean, we talked about how a huge part of the book, and that was somewhat represented through the whole Black Cake thing, was the whole mixed race thing. And I was curious to know more of y'all's thoughts on that, especially with Marble being being like not being aware of the fact that she's not white because
Yeah.
I mean yeah because like she's half white and then on the other side she's black and Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I was also thinking like we didn't really get to see this in the book and I was kind of hoping that they would touch on it a little bit, but like the dawn of realization for Byron and Benny when they realize that they're actually part Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I were to find out that I had a whole grandparent who was a completely different race, I would have been like, wow, that alters my whole perception of my heritage and who my
Mm-hmm.
ancestors were and all that kind of stuff. But we didn't really get to see them. You know, I think they were probably more caught up in all the other things, which
Yeah.
is fair. But so what did y'all think of that and the way that race was discussed in the book and mixed race and passing and those types of things?
I thought it was like really interesting because also like I was thinking there's an author here, like he discovered his I think granddad was black, but his dad was white passing. Like it was like a real life, like it was a memoir situation. And I was considering because like he's white passing and has always lived as a white person, like the way you lived or are perceived often impacts like how you identify yourself in the world. So I thought that was interesting. Maybe that is the reason it really wasn't touched for Byron and the sister because like they have always experienced being black in America, and then therefore like it'll alter their perception of their heritage, but it might not alter their perception of their own identities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm going to answer your question, but what I thought was not addressed was that the UK was literally stealing babies.
Also
You
true.
know, that
Yes.
just got glossed over. I'm like, and her parents hoped that they would never get figured out that they were part of that pipeline. The
Mm-hmm.
same thing
Yeah,
with like the um, the labor drain from the Caribbean to the UK. It never gets addressed that that was strategic to help boost the economy in actually that time frame that they were trying to attract different immigrants from different parts of the world to do labor. And so those two things happened. I was like, so we're not going to talk about it, but we're going to just drop it in the story? What? But then besides that, I was like, I think that's part of how identity versus ethnicity versus culture starts to get murky for people because I identify as Caribbean, right? But my great grandfather is Dominican, right? And I never talk about that identity because I don't have any frame of reference. But I think about all of my friends who had men in their lives, family members who had like whole other families, right? That might have been with women of different ethnicities. And so they don't associate with the Blackness because, you know, they were from Guyana. And so they were Indo-Caribbean. You know what I mean? Like, so it's all like this, you associate with what you know. So your identity is formed based on who you are. And for Marble, it was her white evil, not evil, like her parents loved her, right? But she was stolen. And I will die on that hill.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think that was probably really difficult. But like, I mean, I think it would be difficult for the because that was a real thing that happened, right? I think. So I can't imagine what the actual people who would have found out at some point that maybe they knew they were adopted because
But
like
didn't
some of
realize,
them
yeah.
didn't realize that they were stolen. You
Mhm.
know, so that was really sad to read about with regards to like the whole mixed race thing. I think y'all made a lot of sense with the whole idea of like there's a difference between how you experience the world versus what your heritage is, and I think that's what passing is all about. You
Mhm.
know, like people do say that there's a difference between race and ethnicity or race and heritage, and I think that that's a little bit of a murky thing to say, but there is a semblance of truth or reality in that statement because in the sense that sometimes if you look a particular way and you experience the world in a particular way, it doesn't really matter what your heritage is or if you have one grandparent who is a different race, because that could because how you look and how people perceive you is what ultimately, pushes you through the world, right?
Mhm.
And I find that to be so interesting. um and yeah, it's just that for me, like, because I have a fascination with history, and like sometimes I sit down and be like, who were like my ancestors in India? Like, what did they used to do? Like, what were their names? Like, these
Mhm.
people are the reasons for my existence. I have no idea who they are. So because I have this sort of like insatiable curiosity about those sort of things, like if I were to find out that I had one ancestor who was not Indian, one grandparent especially who was not Indian, I'd be like, wow, what went on there? Like, who were those
Mhm.
people? So for me, um, that I think is a really interesting thing to like think about. So when I was reading the book, I was like, wow, that's really why, and it reminded me too of like what you was saying also reminded me of Brother by David Chariandi, which we read for
Mhm.
Bashment Book Club, and how the boys were Dogla, so their mom was black, their dad was Indian, but because their dad wasn't a part of their life, and because they grew up being perceived and treated as black boys in Toronto, they didn't identify as Dogla or even mixed really. They just were black, And
Mhm.
so it's just interesting how heritage becomes, a slave to what you actually look like. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, and we do see that a lot with like Caribbean people because West Indians have this way of just like looking at
Looking
you.
at you, and then you're like put in certain things based on how you look, for sure. Yeah.
You are what you look like. I don't
Yes.
care if your mom is this and your dad is
Mhm.
this. I don't care if like you're half Chinese and you're half black. You look Douglas, so I'm gonna call you Douglas. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
like, it's it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, and it just brings me back to the whole black cake like scenario of like all of these different like things from different places came together to make this new tradition. It's sort of like the same with like our culture. Like Lin being Chinese, like he grew up in the fictional version of Jamaica that's in this book. So therefore that was his culture, that was his heritage. And it sort of like challenges people for when they think of the Caribbean, like what ethnicities they're thinking of when they think of the Caribbean, because I feel like people don't often realize like I've met Chinese people with Jamaican accents, like Chinese Jamaican people, and people are always surprised when they meet them, being like, "Oh my god, the accent!" And you're like, "They're from Jamaica. What else are you expecting to come out of their mouth?" Like,
Yeah.
so like those sort of situations where like you came from like your family came from somewhere else, but the Caribbean is now your culture. Like whatever island you are on is your culture, and like that challenge of feeling like you're both foreign to the place you've grown up in, but also this is all you know as your culture.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it's just like it goes to show, like, to remind people that Caribbean is not a race, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like anybody could be Caribbean,
Yeah.
right? Like people get so, like, every time a white Jamaican
It's
makes a
on
video,
TikTok, and then people are
they'll be like, "Oh my god!"
attacking them. Oh
So
my
what do you
god.
think the white Jamaicans sound like? They're still
Yeah.
Jamaican, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like it's really funny to me when people uh don't, because like even some people, like for me too, right? But obviously with Indians it's different because there's like more of us, so it's like really normal to be Indian from the Caribbean. I don't feel like a foreigner in my own country because there's tons of
Yeah.
there's a huge population, right? But like to outsiders, when they hear my accent, they're like, "Oh my god, I didn't realize that you were from the Caribbean." I'm like, "I didn't realize you were from America. You look like a human being, but
Mm-hmm.
there's no prerequisite to how to look to be from any place. You could be from, there's black people from Japan. There's
Mm-hmm.
Chinese people from South America and the Latin world. So
Yeah.
it's just, there's no way to. History is so complex, and I think again that's what the whole black cake
Mm-hmm.
metaphor is trying to reinforce. That, like, humans are, a lot of us are products of diaspora upon not just like one diaspora, but like diaspora
Multiple.
on diaspora on diaspora, which is just like, I mean, marble alone is like Chinese, then Jamaican, and then black Afro Jamaican, and then to London, and then it's a
So
lot.
much. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot, and I like that the book kind of sort of messed around with that.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, yeah, it's really
Yeah.
interesting.
I think it was like the first time like it was like properly, like not even like explored, but like shown how complex identities are, because I think my mom's dad was also mixed, but I don't know what with. So like just like all of that being layered into your identity as well. And then just thinking of Benny when she was in, was it Italy or somewhere, wherever she was, where she was like having a dinner and there was a white American woman, and when they were asking Benny where she's from, they were like, "Oh, she's from the Caribbean." But then when Benny asked the blonde woman where she was from, they're like, "Couldn't you tell she's blonde? She's obviously from America." So like going back to that, like the visuals often inform how people will perceive your heritage as well.
It's really interesting. And even me, like, I always used to think, okay, well, I'm fully Indo-Caribbean, so I have no mixedness in my heritage. But that's not really true, because India is a very diverse subcontinent. When I looked into like some of my heritage, I realized that I have ancestors from this part of India and this part of India and this part of India that are now actually Pakistan. And I was like, wow, I am mixed, but I'm not. Like, I'm like because like
it's giving black cake. It's giving
black cake. It's giving black cake. Yeah. So it's interesting because like over there they view themselves as different ethnic groups. But like over here it doesn't matter if you're like mixed with Punjabi heritage and Bengali heritage and Hindustani, like you're just Indian. Light skin Indian, dark skin Indian, brown skin.
It always comes back to that as well, I feel like, in the Caribbean specifically, because there's like red skin, yellow skin, like
it's all about, it's again, Caribbean is like, forget your history. How you look is who you are. And I think that's true of like the characters in this book and how they experience the world.
And how much of that is like also based on how like slavery and everything, where people were categorized based on their like skin tone as well. So there's a reason for everything in history.
Oh gosh, yeah. We have a lot to unpack here.
Also, Linnell's in the backstage as well. I think she's
locked
in purgatory. Yeah.
Oh wait, do I have to?
You have to let her back it.
Oh god.
We left her in purgatory.
Sorry, Linnell, I left you in purgatory. I didn't realize I had to add you back. I'm a terrible host. Linnell. She's stuck in like this cackle. Oh god. Linnell, what are your thoughts on the whole mixed thing that we were discussing?
I agree with everything you guys said. I don't want to go too far back, but yeah, I agree. I think you are who people assume you look like, and that's definitely. And it sometimes creates an identity crisis for you because you're not the much who believe you are T.
About 30% of it this time.
I do not know what's going on.
Your internet had a slice of hot cake. That's what happened.
The storm coming, so that's the only thing. I
true.
think.
Okay.
Florida.
Yes.
LOL.
Yes.
I have a question for y'all that we can talk about. So like we mentioned, this isn't set from a specific Caribbean island. It's never like said what island.
That was going to be my next question.
Like literally, I was like, what do we feel about these books? Like usually, often literary, where set on an ambiguous Caribbean island, not determined. Like the amalgamation, we were talking about like the accent of the audiobook as well. That was something we were discussing. And like there are other books we've read that have been like this, like Serious Blooms at Night. Like, have you noticed differences in how like these books use this ambiguous setting, basically?
Well, so there's two types of these books that I've encountered. Either the fictional Caribbean island with a whole new name, like in Serious Blooms at Night, or the ambiguous island that doesn't have a name, but that's clearly based off of somewhere. I think the reason it's interesting that Charmaine did this, because I found that this was a trend in the early 2000s and maybe 1990s, and it sort of retired, and now everybody's a little more explicit about where they're writing about. I never quite understood why that came up, but I do wonder if it's because, especially if you're writing from the diaspora, you don't want to there's always that fear of misrepresentation, like, or not accurately representing the accent or this or that. So I think creating a fictional island can give you the leeway to sort of, express, be free, in how you're writing without having to deal with people saying, oh, this is not right, this is not what happened, this is not how we do it. And so I think that's fine. I also, when I listened to the author's note, she did say that like the whole riot thing with the Black people burning down the Chinese people's store, that never actually happened in Jamaica, but it was rooted in like the historical tensions were real, so it's something that could have like hypothetically potentially happened, but she made it happen in the book, so maybe that was also part of why she wanted to be a little bit more vague, even though it was from the get-go, it's very clear that it was Jamaica that this book is based off on. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So I don't know what Charmaine identifies as, but if she's a second generation Jamaican, I think she says that she has family members from different parts of the Caribbean and Jamaica. And I think this is very reminiscent of second, third, fourth generation Caribbean kids who have a connection to the country, but no frame of reference, right? So in some ways, they have key identifying factors about the island, and in some ways have romanticized or villainized it based on their family's storytelling. And so to create a fictional Jamaica makes more sense, right? Because that is your frame of reference, especially if you don't have any concrete connections to it. And so that's why I was like, this makes sense. But in my mind, I was like, just call it Jamaica, because you're saying parishes, these like descriptors of the island are so specific to Jamaica, it makes sense to just say Jamaica. So it's like that push and pull of, I don't want to say it is this, but in my imagination, let me just use these key things that I know to be true of this place. So I think she gets away with creating a fictional place, but heavily relying on what we knew to be true about this place.
That makes sense. I can get why that would be a reason to sort of like, and I think a part of why they do it too is to show the connections between the islands and the countries. because it's like, yes, we are very distinct countries with different cultures in our own, but we're also the same region. So there's lots of what can be, represented by Jamaica or for Trinidad or for Barbados, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But Kiki makes a really good point here, I think. You were going to say something, Paige?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I agreed with you about like the I feel like because it was more about the experience of diaspora, that might be why it wasn't a specific island stated, because there were like universal feelings and experiences that could be found. So I feel like that was part of the reason in the choice, probably.
That makes sense too. And then also the whole like, ooh, which island is this kind of thing is probably fun for readers. So Kiki makes a really good point though. She says, I didn't like it in this book partly because there was so much of the book that was set elsewhere in places where the author was quite specific. That is true. And that's something that did cross my mind when I was reading it. Well, I have to be honest, I didn't realize that the book didn't say Jamaica until I reached the author's note.
Fair.
When she said that it was an unnamed island, I was like, what? I assumed, I could have sworn I heard these people say they were Jamaican in the book. I could have sworn. and like, part of that is because they were so like Italy, UK, America, China, it left the book too open to this colonial mapping where the metropoles are shown in relief and the Caribbean countries are some Vegas, Tropicana, local, wild sea, and tamarind. And that's definitely true. Because I mean, if you're gonna be vague about the Caribbean, why not be vague about North America? Why? Because like remember when we read Serious Blooms at Night, there was Canada, but she didn't call it Canada. She called it
like the North, or
the shivering, freezing North. First of all, Charmaine was just such a troll. She literally instead of calling it like a name, like she called the island, she was like the shivering, freezing North. Was the name of Canada, like in a very serious literary fiction novel, like fairy tale children's fantasy, shivering, freezing North. But I get why, that would be a concern, because why be vague about one thing and be specific about everywhere else? I don't know.
I think you can get everywhere else wrong though, and not face the same critique, right? Like you can get Italy wrong, you can get Ireland wrong, right? Because it's not central to the story, but this unnamed island is key to a lot of backstory, and so you don't want to get that culturally wrong. So I think, do I agree? I think I understand why the decision was made.
I also wonder if part of the choice is like, who's the audience that the publisher is looking for this novel, right? Like the people, like I'm thinking of the white people who are reading this would probably realize those mistakes of like the tentpole, the metropole areas, and would be more forgiving toward like the Caribbean stuff. So I wonder how much of that was like an editorial choice that didn't actually serve the story in a way that maybe more specificity would have. For the Caribbean island.
That makes a lot of sense too. Sometimes you don't know whether it's the publisher or the editor pushing something.
If they want it to be more like commercially viable as well. I wonder how much, because this book was pushed quite a bit, I feel like, in the UK and the US. Which is rare, I feel like.
So, is it optioned for a movie? I think I saw something that Oprah is it's going to be on the Oprah network, I think.
Interesting.
That's cool. I hope they're more specific about that is Jamaica, if they're gonna do that.
It's just a fictional random island.
Fictional random island, and America and Canada.
That's filmed in Florida. Or maybe Key West.
Key West, 100%. It's always Key West. Oh my god.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. Which Caribbean island? You're from Key West.
We are all from Key West.
Yeah. Island girl. I'm from Long Island. Yeah. I don't know if I think that was all of the things that I could think of to ask, but there was so much, because this book had so much layers to it, like a cake,
So, just coming back to the cake.
Does anybody have any more thoughts or questions about the book? Anybody in the audience would like to?
If anybody in the audience has anything.
Let the audience decide. Y'all remember that meme?
No. How long ago was it?
There was this video. This guy ate like all his food, and then he didn't like it, and he tried to get a refund, and the waitress was like, "Well, let the audience decide."
Oh my god, dead.
It's good. It's good.
Apparently,
Okay.
the author not grew up in Jamaica, but like has lived in Jamaica, according to the bio. Jamaica and Italy, which
Okay.
facts are why Italy is part of the book.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I mean, I think she definitely, you could tell that she knows a little bit about the geography of the island and whatnot. Like, she's been there, you know, she's not just,
She's been
she didn't just go on Google Images. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Kiki, in the sense that it is annoying to, like, kind of, especially with the whole vague about the Caribbean island, but specific about the metropole. But I also do understand, like, the desire to not want to, like, offend people who might be nitpicky about, and when I say people, I mean me, because you all know how I get when
we've been critical before.
Yeah, we've been, you know, and I think you can't blame us, right? Because I mean, so much of our stories is mediated by the global north, right? Like, even Caribbean writers who are from here and who write stories based here, their publishers are usually UK and US, right? Even Pipal Tree, which is like the Caribbean publisher, is based in the UK, right? So there's always this sort of intervention and mediation of the global north in our telling of stories. So, you know, and then the white people will read the books, the general Americans, not just white people, will read the books and be like, oh yeah, this book is like so Caribbean and it's like representation for like Trinidad and Jamaica. And then I'm over here like,
the way your accent was actually stunning. That was so good.
Thank you. Thank you. I make a convincing Valley girl.
Yeah. I'm obsessed.
I'm just gonna wear a blonde wig and move to California.
So interesting that you say that, because I went to this is so not related to the book discussion, but there is a consortium of Caribbean researchers who are trying to preserve narrative Caribbean stories, because what they have found is that the clearinghouses of like enslaved narratives or historical artifacts are actually housed somewhere else and not in the Caribbean island. And it's actually very fascinating work. And one of the researchers call it like plantation research, where a lot of them have been trained somewhere else, take on the ideals of, you know, whatever home country they're learning to be researchers are, and then trying to apply that to the countries that they're trying to study. And there's this dissonance between not being able to honor some of these stories because your conventional research training tells you that this is not quality research. Anyway, long story short, I bought the book. I love the book. It's very dense. However, it's really good.
Y'all are serving academic on both sides of me, and I'm just head empty, no thoughts. I'm the head empty, no thoughts energy of this book club.
Well, since we're coming down to the end of the stream, I thought we would announce what we decided for our next book, which will probably be sometime in July.
Yes.
What was that, Linnell? Linnell have a lot to say behind this.
We didn't pick a romance. That's what I said.
Oh, okay. We'll do a romance next
We will.
time.
We'll find a romance.
I mean, this is a romance, but it's YA romance.
Listen,
so, I mean,
that sounds great to me.
You know, we could just age up the characters in our mind. That might be kind of problematic. Don't do that. Okay.
Isn't that what Lil Man was trying to do?
No!
Oh my god, I'm dying.
Okay, so the book that we'll be reading next is Where the Rhythm Takes You by Sarah Das. This is a YA romance retelling of Jane Austen's Persuasion that takes place in Tobago,
So
where
excited.
I was just last week. So pick up a copy of this book wherever you can find a copy. It's a Jane Austen Persuasion retelling in Tobago like?
It's gonna be. I'm so excited.
Her mind, her power. The
Should
author
I
sent me the-
know? Should I read Persuasion? Because I didn't grow up on that. I was not.
Okay, I don't know one thing about Persuasion, so I ain't gonna. You can't persuade me to read that.
Dead. If you really want to like see what it's based, watch one of the like adaptations. Don't read the book.
Yeah.
Less of a time commitment.
Oh.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay. Maybe read it. That
maybe. I mean, I know what Persuasion is about.
Yeah.
I think it's like some sort of like they all have a family bed and breakfast, and then somebody comes and she falls in love with them. And it's the same thing with this, except it's a resort. So like the main character's family owns a resort, and like her old boyfriend from the past comes back to stay at the resort, and it's like tensions ensue. So I'm really yeah.
So maybe I will read Persuasion again. I haven't read it in a very long time, but I would like to compare it. So I think that might be.
I do have a copy of it in my classics collection that I collect but don't read. I call it my one day Inshallah collection. So speaking of Inshallah, I think that's where we're going to end today's live stream. Thank you so much, Paige and Nanelle, for joining me today, and thank you to our wonderful audience of 5 right now.
Love all of you.
And, sharing your thoughts on this wonderful book. So yeah, we will see you all for the next live show. We'll do all of the announcements with the times and the dates and whatnot. So stay tuned for that. Follow us at Bash Book Club on Twitter and Bashment Book Club on Instagram?
Yes.
Right. Follow us for more details there. Okay, bye everybody.